The water hit me like a cold slap. I was in the kitchen, holding a bowl, when the ceiling above the sink split and poured brown rain all over my lunch. I backed up, heart thudding, as plaster and damp insulation fell into the sink. My landlord's name flashed on my phone, but I couldn't breathe enough to call. I stood there, hand trembling, watching the slow, steady drip that had soaked the plaster into soft, sagging sheets. I felt small and angry and scared, all at once. This was not the first problem. My apartment had been leaking for months. Pipes rattled at night. The heating barely worked in winter. I had sent emails, texts, and even a polite note under his door. Each time he promised to fix things. Each time nothing changed. Now my dishes were ruined, my favorite mug cracked, and the ceiling hung like a wet wound. I remembered every time he'd laughed off my worries. "It's fine, Joy," he'd said. "Old buildings do that." He never came with tools. He never hired a professional. I wanted him to feel the same panic I felt now. My hands curled into fists. This was the exact moment I knew I had to stop being quiet. I called him. His ringtone played for a long time. When he finally answered, his voice was easy, like I was the one interrupting his day. "Hey, Joy. Is everything okay?" "The ceiling collapsed," I said. I could hear the cheapness of the phone line and the flatness in my voice. "My kitchen is ruined." He sighed. "Come on, it's just plaster. I'll send someone next week." Next week! I felt heat bloom in my chest. There's water everywhere. My food, my papers. "Look, I don't have time for this right now." He cut me off with that kind of confidence that hurts, the kind that says you don't have to listen. I told him no. I told him I wanted a certified plumber and a contractor, and I wanted them today. He laughed, said I was being dramatic. I hung up and started packing a bag. I could not sleep with mold, likely growing in the dark corners. I felt foolish leaving, but the building smelled like secrets and wet wood. I walked out into the hall, past the neighbors who pretended not to notice, clutching the bag like a shield. I stayed with a friend the first night. Her couch was small but safe. I kept replaying every interaction with the landlord in my head, searching for where I should have done something sooner. The next morning, my friend Marcus made me coffee and told me to call a tenant helpline. "You don't have to take this," he said. "People will help." I submitted a formal repair request online and attached photos of the hole, the water stains, the ruined cabinets. I mailed a certified letter too, because everyone kept telling me to keep records. I was new to fighting for myself. My mother always told me to be nice, to not make waves. But this felt like more than waves. This felt like being pushed underwater. That afternoon, the landlord texted, "I'll check it tomorrow. Calm down." The tone was mocking. I called the tenant helpline, and they explained my rights in plain words. I could demand repairs within a set period. If he failed, I could withhold rent, or even arrange repairs myself and deduct costs. They said keep documenting everything. My heart raced at the idea that this could be fixed without begging. I felt steadier, like I had tools to use. I returned to the apartment with a contractor's estimate in mind. The ceiling sagged more. I tossed the ruined dinnerware into a bag and found a dark, fuzzy ring creeping across the wall behind the stove. Black mold. My chest tightened. I couldn't live with that in the air I breathed. I snapped more photos and wrote another message. "This is urgent. The mold is growing. I need it fixed now." His reply came hours later. "Mold? Can't be. I'll get to it when I have time." I read the text 3 times. It felt like a dismissal that carried weight. I called the local health department. They told me that mold is a health hazard and that landlords must address it immediately. An inspector could issue a violation. 2 days later, the inspector came. He walked through, tapping the rotten wood quietly, then took measurements and photos. He shook his head. "This is severe," he said. "You can't stay long. This is a violation." He handed me a form, an official notice of violation to the landlord. My hope flickered. The city had ordered him to act. I felt a little victory spark, but the reality that I might be forced out while my landlord ignored his duty made my stomach drop. The landlord's response after the inspector's visit was a short text. "We'll fix it. Don't worry." There was no schedule, no plan, just words. I called the inspector, and he said the city would follow up. Meanwhile, the violation gave me leverage. I sat at my tiny kitchen table and made a list. Health reports, photos, texts, emails, the rent receipts. I mailed another certified letter demanding repairs within 72 hours. On the third day, a handyman showed up. He pumped his fist with bad cheer and worked quickly, but I watched him patch the problem with cheap materials. The mold was layered under drywall. You couldn't just cover it. The smell returned the very next day. I woke at dawn choking. My chest burned when I breathed. I left work early, and the doctor confirmed what the inspector feared: respiratory irritation from mold. I sent my medical notes to the landlord and demanded temporary relocation or rent reduction. He threatened me with eviction instead. He called me ungrateful. I felt smaller than ever. That night I couldn't sleep. The building hummed like it wanted to drown me. I realized his threats were a tactic. He thought fear would make me stop. It made me angrier. I called the tenant helpline again. They asked if I wanted to pursue a claim for repair costs and medical bills. I said yes. They walked me through filing a complaint with the housing court. I felt unsteady but determined. The helpline also recommended speaking to a lawyer. I called a legal aid clinic and met with an attorney named Nina. She had a steady voice and a notebook. She did not seem surprised by my story. "You've documented well," she said. "You have cause. He violated housing codes, ignored health hazards. We can seek damages for repairs, medical costs, and penalties." She warned me of the ways landlords retaliate: evictions, threats, even false claims. My stomach tightened. "I don't want to be homeless," I said. Nina nodded. "We will ask the court to prevent retaliation. We'll file an emergency motion if necessary." Leaving the clinic, my hands felt shaky but filled with a strange power. I had a voice in the law now, and people who knew how to use it. The landlord wasn't subtle. 2 days after my meeting with Nina, he posted an eviction notice on my door. The paper was official looking but wrong. Dates scrambled, charges I did not owe. My neighbor knocked and whispered that he had done similar things to others. Tears came hot to my eyes. I felt violated in a new way, like my whole life could be overturned on a whim. Nina told me to file for an emergency hearing immediately. We packed our evidence and went to court. The judge read the eviction notice and frowned. The landlord argued that the apartment was being misused and that I had withheld rent. He waved an envelope of supposed late payments. Nina produced the certified mail receipts, the city violation, the inspector's report, and my medical notes. The judge listened. After a long, tense pause, the judge denied the eviction and issued a temporary restraining order against the landlord to stop any retaliatory actions. My hands trembled as Nina hugged me outside the courtroom. I felt a moment of relief, so big I wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. But the fight was only starting, and the landlord's face outside the courtroom told me he would not give up easily. The landlord responded with small cruelties. He stopped answering calls, then started calling constantly at odd hours. He complained about noise he made up, demanded inspections I never consented to, and sent messages accusing me of damaging the property. Each message was a move to push me out. He filed a countersuit claiming I had breached the lease. I read his filings in disbelief. No facts, just accusations. I filed back with Nina's help, providing proof against each claim. We also obtained records showing his pattern of negligence, other tenants with mold complaints, city violations at his other properties. It felt like pulling threads that revealed more damage. The more we looked, the more the landlord's neglect showed like rot. One afternoon, a commercial reporter called. Someone had tipped them about my case as part of a series on bad landlords. Suddenly, my private struggle became public. I hesitated, worried about shame and exposure. Nina encouraged me. "This is what pushes change," she said. The story ran with my permission, careful to protect details. Messages came from strangers thanking me. My chest swelled with a new resolve. People were watching. The landlord's anger escalated. He cut off building repairs, claiming he couldn't find contractors. The heat went out in a cold week. Pipes froze in the stairwell. He started to send notices to other tenants, pressuring them to file complaints against me. I received anonymous notes accusing me of causing trouble. The building felt crowded and cold and hostile. Nina filed motions for sanctions against him and requested the court force necessary repairs. We subpoenaed his maintenance logs and contractor invoices. The logs were thin. The invoices were mostly for cosmetic work. When we compared dates, The landlord had promised repairs but never scheduled them. Each discrepancy felt like pulling back a curtain on his negligence. One morning, the water main burst in the basement. The steam and panic woke me. Fire trucks arrived, and tenants rushed to move belongings. I stood in the hall feeling both alarmed and oddly vindicated. This crisis proved our claims. The landlord tried to blame tenants for not maintaining the building, but the city inspected and issued more violations. The building's papers were starting to tilt toward us. While the city piled citations, I was getting calls from other tenants who wanted to join. One by one they told me their stories: leaks, broken locks, rodents, and threats. I realized this wasn't just my fight. It was for everyone who had been dismissed. We formed a group. At our first meeting in the community center, faces were tired but determined. We made a list of shared grievances and signed authorizations to join the lawsuit. Nina filed a class claim that included multiple tenants. That changed everything. The landlord now faced a legal team and a chorus of witnesses. He began to look small against the weight of all these stories. Still, I felt anxious. This meant more attention, more pressure. My job felt at risk when the landlord's people called my department, hoping to intimidate me. I stayed steady. I remembered the breathing exercises the doctor had taught me. We prepared witness statements, organized receipts, and cataloged emails. It was painstaking work, but each page we added built a case that couldn't be ignored. For the first time, I felt like we had a real chance. Discovery began. We received boxes of the landlord's documents, and he got ours. Hidden in a stack of invoices, I found an email from his attorney admitting they'd been cutting corners to save money. It was a small email, but it was like finding a key. I felt my stomach flip. Evidence was a strange kind of power, cold, factual, undeniable. Then a twist. The landlord tried to silence one tenant with a settlement offer, cheap cookies, and a quick repair if they drop out. The tenant refused. That tenant later told me he had been terrified of retaliation but wanted to stop the abuse. His courage made me feel less alone. Nina found that the landlord had falsified some maintenance records. That discovery led to a motion for sanctions and an accusation of fraud. The court responded, scheduling a hearing on the falsified documents. The landlord arrived in court, face set like stone, but he had fewer allies this time. People were beginning to see patterns. I felt the case shift from my personal fight to a story about accountability. Then came the biggest shock yet. One night I got an anonymous message. "Check your bank. He's been accessing tenants' online payments." My heart pounded. I logged in and found unauthorized withdrawals traced to an account linked to his management company. I printed the bank records and handed them to Nina. She pressed her lips together, then nodded slowly. "This changes the stakes." We notified the police and the bank. An investigation began into potential theft and embezzlement. The landlord's face when he was interviewed by detectives looked older, smaller. The city slapped another citation for financial misconduct. Suddenly, his options were narrowing. We filed an amended complaint adding claims of fraud. The landlord's lawyer protested, calling it a smear. But the evidence was clear. I watched court clips of him testifying, sweating under questioning about money movement. The judge ordered an audit of his accounts. My stomach fluttered in a mix of fear and hope. This was bigger than a ceiling or mold. This was about trust broken at a deeper level. With the audit underway, the landlord's cash flow tightened. Contractors he owed began to file liens. He scrambled to sell off a property, but bank holds complicated the sale. Meanwhile, the city demanded immediate repairs with a deadline. The landlord missed it. Each missed deadline led to fines and more public attention. The landlord took a risky step. He served me with a defamation suit in retaliation, claiming my public statements had harmed him. I laughed at the absurdity and then felt the low bite of fear again. A defamation suit could last years and cost thousands. Nina filed a motion to dismiss, arguing his suit was a slap, an attempt to silence a lawful complaint. The judge agreed to fast-track our motion. Public support grew as the media covered the story. People emailed the city and requested inspections at his other properties. Donations started to trickle in to support tenants in need. I sometimes felt like a symbol, and that weight was strange. I wanted simply to have safe walls and clean air, not to be in newspapers. Still, hearing neighbors cheer when a citation was posted made me feel less alone. We prepared for trial. Nina, and the team reviewed every line of evidence. I practiced testifying, speaking clearly about the mold, the medical visits, and the way the landlord ignored calls. I learned to hold my voice steady. The night before the first trial day, sleep slipped past me like a shadow. I looked at the photos and notes, at the messages from neighbors thanking me, and felt the reality of what was at stake. Opening day came. The courtroom hummed with whispers. The landlord looked exhausted and angry. His lawyer tried to make him look like a victim of bad tenants. Our witnesses told a different story. One by one, neighbors recounted their fears, kids with asthma coughing at night, elderly tenants slipping on rotting stairs. Videos showed water dripping from ceilings during a board meeting. The judge watched closely. Then, a twist the landlord didn't expect. The contractor he'd hired to patch the mold came to testify for us. He said he'd been paid to cut corners and told to finish quickly to avoid the city. He named names. The courtroom murmured. My heart beat fast as proof stacked against the landlord like building blocks falling on a crooked wall. We called the inspector next. He described the violation in plain words: uninhabitable conditions, immediate hazard. The judge's face tightened as he read the official reports. The landlord's defense frayed. I testified, voice steady, about waking choking and seeing the ceiling collapse. I kept my eyes forward and breathed. The experience felt like walking a tightrope above an abyss. During cross-examination, his lawyer tried to trip me up, asked about dates and emails, questioned if I had exaggerated. I met each question with the evidence we had carefully filed. Each piece of proof faced each attack. It was tiring and terrifying and oddly empowering. At the end of the day, the judge ordered an independent evaluator to estimate damages. He also warned the landlord that further retaliation would be met with penalties. Walking out of the courtroom, the sun felt unreal, brighter, like the world had shifted a little. I kept thinking of all the nights I'd felt powerless, and how those nights had pushed me here to the sudden light. The independent evaluator's report was thorough. It listed repairs, structural remediation, health-related losses, and emotional distress. It put price tags on things I had not thought to value: sleep lost, fear endured, and the cost of moving temporarily. The number stunned me. It was the first time I saw my suffering turned into ledger terms. The landlord's lawyer pushed back, arguing that some damages were speculative. Nina stood firm. These are consequences of her client's choices, she said plainly. The judge set a schedule for final arguments. We waited, breathing through each day. Then a surprise. The landlord offered a settlement. He wanted to avoid a public judgment and proposed paying a small fraction of the damages and making some repairs. Nina told me the offer was low, an attempt to buy silence. We asked for a higher number and a binding requirement to fix every unit. He refused. The stakes rose. I began to understand that if we took his low offer, other tenants might be left behind. I couldn't accept that. The trial resumed. Witnesses testified about the landlord's pattern of neglect across properties. Financial documents showed his company collecting rent while skimping on maintenance. The judge listened with a steady, serious face. At one point, the landlord looked directly at me, as if trying to read what I would do next. I felt an odd calm. This was not just about me being right. It was about accountability. We brought an expert testimony about mold's health impacts. The doctor explained how long-term exposure could exacerbate conditions and lead to chronic issues. The landlord's lawyer tried to discredit the expert, but his credentials were solid. The courtroom murmured again. Then a new twist. One of the landlord's previous tenants testified that after complaining about conditions, he had been harassed and then forced to leave without his deposit. That testimony connected dots and showed a pattern of retaliation. The narrative had shifted from isolated negligence to systematic abuse. My throat tightened with the weight of what we had uncovered. The judge scheduled closing arguments and warned both sides this case would have consequences. During closing arguments, Nina spoke calmly and fiercely. She walked the judge through each piece of evidence like a story with a clear moral. The landlord chose profit over safety. She asked for full damages, repair costs, medical bills, relocation expenses, and compensation for emotional distress. She asked for punitive damages to discourage future conduct. The landlord's lawyer argued that some issues were due to aging infrastructure beyond his control. He pleaded for leniency. The judge listened without comment, then retired to review the case carefully. Waiting felt like holding my breath underwater. Every minute the judge was in chambers, my heart thudded. After a long wait, the judge returned. He read the ruling slowly. The court found the landlord liable for breach of the warranty of habitability, negligence, and retaliation. The words hit me like a wave. Then came the amount. Tears blurred the letters as the judge entered damages I had not dared to imagine, a 6-figure judgment that included punitive damages. The number at the bottom stunned me. I felt the room sway, then steadied myself. The ruling was a relief, but not the end. The landlord's team immediately filed an appeal and threatened bankruptcy. Nina moved fast. She filed motions to secure the judgment and asked the court to place liens on his properties. The judge, signed temporary, holds on key accounts while the appeal proceeded. I sat in Nina's office, hands wrapped around a mug, feeling raw and oddly numb. When I thought about money, it didn't feel like vindication. It felt like validation for each sleepless night, each cough, each frightened stare at the dripping ceiling. The judge had awarded $100,000, $100,000 for repairs, medical bills, relocation costs, and a modest sum for emotional distress. It was a clear, public statement that my suffering had value and that negligence has consequences. The landlord posted on a community forum, denying everything and promising an organized legal fight. His voice sounded small against the court order. He tried to stall by filing endless paperwork, but Nina anticipated each move. She secured the lien on his most valuable asset, a small building he had kept for years. That hold made buyers nervous and contractors unwilling to take future work without clear payment. Neighbors came by with hugs and casseroles. They said they were proud I had kept going. I smiled, but inside I felt a complicated mix of victory and sorrow. Justice had been slow and painful, but it had come. We still had to collect the money and make sure the repairs actually happened. Collecting the judgment took strategy. The landlord's appeal threatened to delay payment for months. Nina filed motions to expedite collection and to prevent him from hiding or moving funds. She subpoenaed bank records and worked with a court-appointed auditor. The auditor found accounts where rent had been diverted. That discovery helped us argue the appeal should not pause the judgment. The court agreed to let us enforce parts of the award while the appeal continued. We seized enough to cover immediate repairs and medical bills. Tenants got temporary checks to move into safer units while contractors began work under court supervision. I met with the contractor team and watched them outline the remediation plan, remove the contaminated drywall, replace plumbing, install fresh insulation, and test air quality. The plan was thorough and it felt real. The landlord tried one last desperate move. He filed for personal bankruptcy. His lawyer argued he had no assets beyond the properties under lien. Nina countered with financial records showing income and hidden transfers. The judge refused to let bankruptcy stall repair funding. He warned the landlord this was not a way to avoid responsibility. When the first crew tore out the moldy ceiling in my kitchen, I sat on my steps and cried. They gave me a tent card to sign for temporary housing. Someone brought me a sandwich. Tiny acts of kindness made the world feel salvageable again. Repairs progressed slowly but steadily. The building smelled different each day. Chemicals, wet wood, then the clean, dry crispness of new paint. Air quality tests showed improvement. I slept without waking from coughing fits. Neighbors came together to help each other move boxes and share meals. A sense of community had grown from shared hardship. It surprised me how close we became in those months. The landlord's appeal dragged on, but his legal options dwindled. Evidence of diverted rents and the audit's clear trail made his position weak. He tried to sell smaller properties to cover legal fees, but liens meant buyers balked. Creditors began filing claims. He looked thinner in public and lonelier. One afternoon, the landlord showed up at my door. He was quiet, his face less haughty than before. He mumbled an apology that sounded like a script, quick, guarded. I listened without anger or warmth. I had been fighting for safety, not his remorse. He offered a check for a paltry amount and said he hoped for peace. I left the check on the counter and closed the door. The community center organized a meeting. Tenants voted to form a committee to oversee permanent building management changes. We voted to replace his management company once and for all. We wanted transparency and accountability. The judge's lien would remain, but the repairs were happening. For the first time in years, I felt the building could be a safe home again. The appeal court finally heard arguments. The landlord's counsel spun stories about economic hardship and aging infrastructure. Nina responded with audits, sworn testimony, and documented deception. The panel seemed attentive, flipping through exhibits that had once felt like lifelines in a pile of papers. When the ruling came, the appellate judges affirmed the lower court's decision. No reversal, no reduction. They noted the landlord had acted in bad faith and that punitive measures were justified. That affirmation cleared many obstacles. The frozen accounts were released for repair disbursements and victim compensation. The landlord's bankruptcy attempt collapsed under the weight of financial records and court orders. His properties were now effectively managed by a court-appointed trustee to ensure tenants were safe and repairs continued. I received the funds to cover my documented expenses. The medical bills were paid. The remaining award for emotional distress and the inconvenience of relocation arrived as a check. I had mixed feelings about the money. I had not wanted a profit, only to be safe. Yet the award allowed me to repay debts accrued during the struggle and to start an emergency fund so I would not be vulnerable again. Nina reminded me that the legal victory had broader meaning. "You changed the pattern," she said. "This will make landlords think twice." I looked around the newly painted hallway and felt the truth of that promise settle like dusk, quiet, assured, and steady. With the case behind major hurdles, attention turned to prevention. The tenants' committee worked with the city to ensure regular inspections. We negotiated a binding management change so the landlord could no longer make unilateral decisions. The court approved a plan requiring quarterly reports and accessible maintenance logs. Whoever managed the building now had to show receipts for work done. The landlord, stripped of power, tried to cash in what remained. Creditors wrestled for assets. His personal life faded from community gossip to quiet resignation. He moved away to an apartment managed by a firm that did not accept him as a client. The building's new management hired a community liaison to answer tenant concerns quickly and transparently. I used part of my award to seed a small tenant emergency fund administered by the committee, a safety net for urgent repairs and short-term housing. It felt right, like repairing the world a little bit at a time. We also partnered with a local nonprofit to teach tenants how to document issues and know their rights. That program grew quickly, and people called asking how to start similar efforts. One evening, Tamara, my sister, called. She had read the coverage and wanted to reconnect. Her voice sounded tentative but sincere. She asked if we could meet. I hesitated and then agreed. Some bridges need time and proof before they are safe to cross. Tamara and I met at a quiet cafe. The first minutes were awkward, wrapped in years of distance. She stared at her coffee and then looked up with slow honesty. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't understand how much you carried alone." I told her about the mold, the nights I couldn't breathe, the courtrooms, and the way neighbors became family. She listened without interruption. She admitted she had been shallow and scared of judgment. She wanted to help make amends, not with gifts but with time. We spoke for hours. She offered to volunteer with the tenant education program and to help spread awareness on social media, gently, not for show, but to help other tenants find their voices. I watched her sincerity grow into action. She started attending committee meetings, learning about leases and codes. The awkwardness softened into something patient and honest. Healing took work. There were apologies and small, steady acts of support. Tamara visited with casseroles and then with a notebook, asking questions about tenant rights and documenting stories. She grew into someone who could stand beside me without needing the spotlight. That change felt like something I owed myself, to accept a sister willing to learn and to be open to forgiveness when it came from steady effort. Months later, the building hummed with a new rhythm. Kids played in a safe courtyard, tenants exchanged numbers, and the maintenance log stayed updated in public. The tenant emergency fund helped a family replace a broken heater in winter. My coughs were rare and quiet. The nights were full of sleep. I used part of my award to take a long trip, to breathe somewhere the sky felt different and not think of court dates for a while. I returned with a small sense of quiet and a belief that one voice can matter when others join it. Nina remained a friend, and the tenant education program expanded into neighboring blocks. The landlord paid his fines and, in time, moved away. The court's judgment stayed on record as a warning. Other landlords read about it and began to change their practices. For me, the money was never about wealth. It was about safety, honor, and the knowledge that boundaries had been respected. Some nights I still woke up thinking of the ceiling collapsing, but now I would smile and go back to sleep. I had stood up not just for myself but for my neighbors and for quiet dignity. The check for $100,000 closed a painful chapter and opened a different one where homes are safe, voices matter, and courage can rebuild more than walls. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and tap the bell to get notified the moment we drop a new story, and don't forget to like the video to help others find it.